Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 51st video in the reading and commentary series of the Divine Order and the Universe. Welcome, Tümerhan.
Greetings, everyone. Wishing you all a productive Monday evening.
This evening, the passages we will read have more details on how we make a life plan, what promises we make before we are born to this world, the relation of being and body,
and about all those states we are in and events we encounter regarding our life plan and our choices. Let's hope that, together with our dear friends' questions, comments, and through the mutual field we bring out together, all of us will gain insights this evening.
We already read and discussed many passages on these fundamental topics. We already published 50 videos. We are happy that we uploaded these recordings for a wider audience. So, please watch these if you are a newcomer to this series. Even last week, we summarized many essential topics.
Yes, both for the people who encountered this book and/or this reading and commentary series, and also, for the people who already read and began studying this book, the mechanisms explained about the spirit-being-body relation have utmost importance. When they ponder on this relation, how they think about their body and their consciousness will dramatically change.
Yes, let's start reading. The body is an organism. Therefore, there are cells, organs, systems which constitute it. All of these parts make up the whole of the body organism by becoming subject to each other and becoming systemized. And its organizer is the brain which governs that body. However, this brain is connected to the essence being. Therefore, smaller organisms that constitute the body organism also have their own beings, that is, organizers, which are much simpler than of the man, and they, in their own right, serve the evolutions of relatively much simpler spirits. So, the being who governs this body is responsible for all these states of the human body. Beings, after they use, that is, benefit from, the bodies as much as possible, by relinquishing their usage over those bodies, they sever their connection with the brain which conducts them, and we call it death.
Here, the first sentence is, "The body is an organism." Our dear friends may remember that in our previous videos, we had discussed this organ-organizer relation in detail. Please watch earlier videos or read the related passages. We know that this relation or chain of organ-organizer exists at every stage and level of the universe. Yes, our body is an organism. And also, our solar system is an organism. Our Milky Way galaxy is an organism. It continues up and up. However, it continues down and down, as well. Our organ systems are organisms, as well as our organs. And all those organs and organ systems continue working under the control of their organizer, that is, our brain. Our brain is the main organizer of this body in this hydrogen realm. The organ governs and directs all the systems in the body. Again, our dear friends who follow us in this series will remember that our brain has different centers that assume different functions, but the main function of our brain is two-sided. The interaction between the being and the body is done via the brain. From the external world, innumerable influences arrive at our body. After all, this was the reason of building a body, wasn't it? All those influences coming from the external world has to be accumulated around a core, and also, all those influences have to be evaluated against the experiences emerged through the interactions with the bodies of other human beings. So, the seat of accumulation and evaluation is our brain, at the consciousness center of our brain. And where do all those data go? At each moment and continuously, these are transferred to our being via the channel of our consciousness. And by this continuous transfer, our being, and consequently, our spirit instantly gets informed and aware about all those effects that belonged to this hydrogen realm, through our body and senses. We had mentioned that the main function of the brain is two-sided. As the brain transfers all those influences and impressions coming from below to the being, simultaneously receives the influences coming from the being to the related parts, centers and organs in the body, as needed in a given moment. Therefore, our brain does its duty as an intermediary organ. Here, in this passage, we encounter this. Smaller organisms that constitute the body organism also have their own beings, that is, organizers which are much simpler than of the man, and they, in their own right, serve the evolutions of relatively much simpler spirits. We read the word simpler twice. Let's consider this word simple as meaning the beings that are yet able to manage only some organisms at some certain and limited level. Those beings are not yet a level to utilize higher organisms. The bodies such simpler beings utilize are at the level of cells. Yes, cells are the bodies of the cell beings. By managing and utilizing these simpler bodies, those beings gain their own experiences under the higher level organism. This higher organism may be a plant body, or an animal body, or a human body. At this point, we need to understand that the ability of becoming a cell in a plant body is different than the ability of becoming a cell in a human body, in regard to the level of comprehension. Because, a being must be at a level of development for becoming exposed to the very complicated magnetic field of a human body and for benefiting from such influences. And at the end of the passage, we read another description of death, as the severing the connection between the being and brain, that is, the connection between these magnetic fields. In our earlier videos, we had read the passages on how the being is built by the spirit. We had mentioned that if a being has a body or built a body, then this means that the 7/8 of its concentration is directed to that body, and the 1/8 of its concentration remains relatively free at that field we call as perceptual point of gathering. And what happens when death occurs? This concentration is severed and returned to the being, and at that perceptual point of gathering, the field of the being becomes whole, and for a certain period time, the being's relation to the hydrogen realm ceases.
This is similar to a very big orchestra. I mean, each organ, from smallest to largest in the organ systems, is like an instrument with a distinct sound, and all those different sounds make a harmonic composition under the control of a conductor. For example, when I say I am Tülin, actually I am not a single being. I represent a whole, made up of multitude of beings that are kept together, managed and governed as a system of beings. And when we talk about simpler beings, please don't think that their functions are insignificant. For example, a being that has a body as a stomach lining cell. Imagine the variety of the functions. This cell will receive and digest the incoming food, but also will respond to the emotional and mental input, as this cell's output has a role in the overall working of the whole system. Our stomach, as the organ closest to the solar plexus chakra, has fastest response to our emotions, as well as our intestines that respond to our fears. Imagine the scope and capacity of instant communication and interaction even a single cell being has with the other beings within the organism of the body. And we read about the structure of the brain first time in the divine order and the universe. There are millions of brain cells, and these cells are the bodies of millions of beings that are governed by this main coordination system of the human brain. And what happens to all those brain cell beings after death? The influence of the being over the physical body and the cells is severed, but the brain cells beings remain as a field of information cloud that recorded and stored all experiences and impressions of that body that just died. Why? Because when the essence being prepares another life plan, this information field will be utilized for the new brain and body of the fetus that will be the next body of the essence being. And we see that those beings don't suddenly reach the state of governing a whole human organism. No, those beings gradually progress towards ever higher levels and stages, as they gain the agency and ability first managing a single cell in different organism and organizations at various levels. As they gain more agency and ability, then they move towards higher levels for sending influences to coordinate an entire human organism. So, beings widen their scope and capacity step by step, stage by stage. And, once again, we need to underline the importance of taking good care of our brain to ensure the good performance of this orchestra. Not only eating good food but also, as Gurdjieff says, taking in good quality impressions are essential for the health of our brain and organism. And what happens to all those cell beings of the organ systems when death occurs, and the being withdraws its concentration from the physical body and its organs? As those cell beings performed their functions, they gained experience and widened their scope, and even if their business is finished and that body just died, they continue their progress and development in order to join and to establish higher and larger organizations.
And I'd like to add that when we say development, it shouldn't be understood as physical growth but rather growth in capacity, agency. It also means expansion, blooming, thrive.
All right, let's continue reading. A being builds a body with the help of superior beings, uses it as long as it benefits from it, and for this, it has control over all parts of that body through the brain and in this way, obtains its material needs via the channel of that body. In this respect, there is not much difference between a being, who is yet in a state of ability to use a human body, using this body, and a being, who is governing a huge solar system constituted with ensembles of matter and beings, conducting this system. There are differences between these only in evolution, width of scope and complexity. Therefore, whatever the meanings of a human being's influences over a body are, the influences of a being in duty over a solar system are the same but more encompassing and complex.
Yes, at the start of this passage, this phrase, a being builds a body with the help of superior beings. At this point, first, let me make a summary of our related discussions in our previous videos. How does the being build a body? Above everything else, a family is needed in the sphere the applications to be done. A female and male need to be a couple. Choosing which female will be impregnated by which male is to be determined in accordance with the needs of the being that will incarnate, and by the agreement of the beings of that female and male. Then, the superior beings with duty sends influences to the conception process as the ovum and sperm, the gamete of the female and of the male fuse, and this fertilized egg or ovum becomes a zygote. And the being begins communication with this zygote as it goes through phases of development. The being intervenes to the magnetic fields of the beings of the brain cells that remained in their field or cloud after the previous body's death, and directs and orients these brain cells beings to build the brain cells of the fetus. And here, in this passage, we see this knowledge again. Also, there is this phrase, uses it as long as it benefits from it. If this need is no more, then there is no need for the being to engage with a body. Then, death occurs. Here, there are two main possibilities. Either the body becomes dysfunctional and useless due to old age, to senile decay, that is, what we call aging occurs. Or if the being does not progress in accordance with the outlined life plan and have difficulties in meeting the promises made for the life plan by making wrong choices, then, the possibility of a new life plan and a new body may arise, so the connection between the being and the body gets severed. And in the second paragraph, there is a very interesting knowledge. A comparison is made between a being in a state of ability to use a human body, and a being governing a solar system. And as we discussed earlier, this difference between these states is only in evolution, width of scope and complexity of the respective being's development. Well, when seen from a wider perspective, we must remember that what the spirits learn in this matter universe is to accomplish the gradual taking over the control of the organizations in ever higher levels. In other words, spirits do applications of taking over the control of the organizations, starting from the simplest to the ever higher level ones. And how the spirits do such applications? Well, let me go back to the initial state of matter, and summarize the stages until the being is built. When the influences from the original principle arrive at the initial amorphous matter, a gathering occurs in the midst of amorphous matter. And then, the influences belonging to the spirits are reflected to those initial matter parts, and the passive and mechanic phase of development begins for the spirits. After almost eternally long time, spirits become able to connect to initial hydrogen atoms. These hydrogen atoms get developed, and the spirits, without intervening, become swept by these atoms' development from hydrogen to helium, to oxygen, to silver, to iron to gold etc. And at some point, these hydrogen atoms exceed their own material limits and emerge as disarrayed fields of extremely high energies. And the spirits utilize the possibility of gathering and organizing these disarrayed energies by building bodies for themselves as perceptual points of gathering, and these bodies are called the beings. And through these beings, various bodies from the cruder matter combinations in the hydrogen realm become possible. And as we read in this book, those bodies start from the simpler forms of plant cells. As the beings get more developed with each experience of directing and governing those bodies, they begin to build and govern ever higher and complex forms of cells and bodies, an animal cell to an animal, and eventually all kinds of cells of a human body. The important point to grasp in this passage is, the organizations get wider and wider, and by these ever-complex experiences in the hydrogen realm, beings get prepared for completely different organization systems in the plan of duty.
If you remember, we read in this book that each being is an evolutionary vehicle assigned to the service of a certain spirit until the end of the universe. This shows us that hydrogen realm is important for spirits to be experienced enough in order to manage much greater organizations. Building a being in the hydrogen realm and gaining experience through this being, and the cruder bodies this being builds. All these happen in the hydrogen realm. However, in our daily life, our perceptions about life in general is so narrow that we can even feel nothing significant happens in our life. Yet, this motion, interaction, and exchange that continues all the time within our human body is incredulously immense. And this human body is like an umbrella organization of our being that embraces innumerable other organizations of other beings. And there is this possibility of almost infinite development, because as we read here, a being, after doing exercises and applications of managing a body's magnetic field in the world, of keeping all those cells and cell beings under an organization, of coordinating all interactions of those innumerable beings with their myriad functions, of receiving, gathering, processing, and sending influences by establishing magnetic field synthesizes can continue working, this time in a solar system again, managing and governing magnetic fields of the celestial objects by influencing their magnetic fields, keeping all those planets in balance and in their orbits, etc. Scales, sizes are incredibly different, but system-wise, these are the same. As above, so below, but as macroscale and microscale. Yes, dear friends, please remember our being's scope and value from this perspective. In this divine system, our beings can create miracles. So, whenever you feel that events in life overwhelm you, please take a deep breath and change your perspective. Make it wider to think about the magnificent immensity of the divine order and the universe. All right. Let's continue reading. When a man is born, his being has a state that reached a certain level of development. Likewise, he will have certain deeds to do in the world in accordance with this certain state of development. So, execution of these deeds is his duty belonging to his world life. That man's living in the world is to realize the world application plan, which is prepared before he descends to the world, by his being with other beings in duty. Therefore, that being, before he came into the world, designed and ventured the deeds he needs to do, and promised to do them. Now that he promised this, and his descent to the world is for executing his promise, then it is necessary for him to keep his promise and pay his due, that is, to execute the designed plan after he descends to the world. For it is imperative to execute the deeds determined by the approval of the plan of duty. By this way, determined deeds are executed in harmony with the equilibrium of the conscience mechanism.
Yes, the first sentence is, when a man is born, his being has a state that reached a certain level of development. Well, we now know that in each life we are born to we practice and experience some certain knowledge, and as a result of these experiences, we gain or acquire essence knowledge, and this new acquisition of essence knowledge brings out a new development, a new widening in our being. And what happens when our being needs to utilize a new body? It encounters a certain level of conscience mechanism that belongs to the level of development it reached in the previous life. Consequently, the being promises to complete some lacking points, to finish some unfinished business in this next lifetime, and a new life plan is outlined around this frame of promised results. Here, there is a sentence, let me read. Execution of these deeds is his duty belonging to his world life. Please do not think that the word duty in this sentence does not have the meaning of this word in relation to the plan of duty. I wanted to underline this, because this question is asked many times in our lectures. People may think that people are beings in duty, with duties to perform for other people, for their family, etc. Well, of course, through the connection to our being, of course we have some tasks to do, and of course, we contribute to each other's development, even if we assume that this person hinders us or that person supports us. Without knowing it, we work for each other. For example, a person you hate most becomes your best companion in your development. So, we must notice such nuances. Alright, back to the being and its life plan for the next life. The being has planned, designed, taken into account some certain tasks and promised to complete these tasks. And those promises bind the being in the next life, because this life plan for the next body include many spatial and temporal details and nuances, as well as choosing a suitable family, a suitable relations dynamic among family members, etc. And that embryo, even starting from the time in the mother's womb, encounters many events. And now we know very well that the being records all those impressions related to the events. In the same way, all of our impressions and deeds are constantly in transfer to our being via our brain. All impressions and experiences of the embryo in the womb is transferred to the being. Therefore, even starting from those earlier times, our value judgments get formed. And those values will shape the personality of the baby as she or he grows up. And that person, as he or she encounters events, will react or respond to these events in accordance with those values. Let me give examples to make it clearer. The values acquired by the child as a result of the relationship with an aggressive father and an aggressive mother are different. Or, the values acquired by the child as a result of the relationship with an aggressive father and a submissive mother are different. Or, the values the child acquired in a very oppressive family setting are different. And what results from these different relationship dynamics? If you remember, last week we had read that in order to benefit from adverse or bad situations, our comprehension needs to be awakened. For this, we need to learn why and because of which weak sides of us we deserve such bad situations. Because of these, so-called bad events are all about for activating our weak sides that lie in wait and making these obvious for us. And these weak or soft spots are the tasks and points we promise to complete and resolve while outlining the life plan. And until we gain the knowledge of comparison related to these points and tasks, we are annoyed, irritated, triggered, offended, hurt, enraged, etc. throughout a lifetime as these become activated. And again, here we read, by this way, determined deeds are executed in harmony with the equilibrium of the conscience mechanism. Therefore, we must keep on asking ourselves if we are living in accordance with our life plan or not. And we certainly receive clues and signs about what is necessary or not for our being, within our daily life, be it by dreams or by intuitions. And if we can notice these clues, and become aware of this ongoing flux of knowledge and guidance, I think, we can see that if we are on the proper balance in the conscience mechanism or not, that if we are keeping our promises or not. Yes, I admit that this is not an easily gained perspective, but it becomes more possible as we study our own self and gain self-knowledge.
This may be a good time to reply this question from one of our dear friends. Does not the being incarnate to live the life it planned? How come the being cannot keep its promises? Well, yes, as you said, the being promised finishing many lacking points for advancing its development, and agreed on the choices of the beings in duty for suitable parents, environment, settings, and even arranged and coordinated some so-called bad events it will be faced with in case it misses its targets related to these promises. Yet, this is a promise given at the level of the being, at a high level of energy, and also in the spherical time comprehension. However, at the moment the being is born as a human being, all those promises become obscured by the dualistic system of our world. That is, the new body built by the concentration of the being isn't born with the entire comprehension of the being that is at a perceptual point of gathering in a much higher level of existence, and this concentration of the being is directed for influencing the brain cells beings as they begin to develop the brain of the fetus. And if you notice, these brain cells beings were the previous brain cells beings of the previous body of the being, so these beings are still at the human stage, and consequently, they have not reached total comprehension, at best they are semi-comprehending. Therefore, those promises given by the being that exists in the spherical time can only become intuited by the brain cells beings. Hence, the brain and the consciousness center of this new human being that lives in the superficial time. As you said, dear Tümerhan, only when we human beings work on ourselves to gain self-knowledge and also track the traces and signs of these higher levels of our true nature, then we become oriented towards such intuitions. With each practice and effort that we make towards the self-knowledge, we take steps in the direction of becoming gradually free of the prison of automatisms, free of the overwhelming states and situations of the worldly life, free of the illusions and identification mechanisms, and we gradually move toward taking over our own responsibility consciously, and starting to intuit those promises, and trying our best to realize these as our life plan becomes revealed. Trying our best. Because there is the Maya or illusions of the world life, with all those attractions, distractions, luring us to a deep slumber, yet, the comprehension only widens when we become awakened from these illusions. And the expanse of the being's comprehension occurs as a result of the value differentiations human being brings out by his or her conscientious states. If the human being can make the connections between such cause and effect chains, then that person can gain merit of attracting life situations and events in accordance with this higher level of reality. And sometimes some stones are placed in the path, or some stones are taken off the path in accordance with that person's walking the path of life. And the most important task of a human being is to never give up, always trying to make efforts for understanding more, for making connections in order to discover and display more conscientious deeds and acts out of no matter what kind of events encountered in life. And please don't think a human being as puppet sent down by the being, and that puppet does everything it is told to do like a robot. No way. Had it been like you assume, then those 500 to 700 lifetimes would not be necessary. Please try to think like this. Yes, we promise to complete some certain deeds, and we outline a plan for the path we will walk on. Yet, if you remember, last week, dear Tümerhan shared that example of a traveler. Just like that traveler, we can stop, but because of some attractions, we decide to stay. Instead of continuing our journey, we begin finding more and more excuses not to move on. Then life, or more correctly, our own being with the assistance of the beings in duty, reshuffle or rearrange all those temporal and spatial connections to see if we can respond in a different way or not. And sometimes we cannot respond properly, and some promises are not kept. This is why, after death, in the spatium, in that isolated self-reflection state, our being does the grand accounting to see these missing parts and to understand the reasons behind these. Only after such a vigorous and impartial facing with the facts, the new life plan can be outlined. Should we wait until we die? No, as long as a person spends efforts and work hard for living a life as outlined in the life plan of the being, and even acquired more comprehension than planned. Because of the value differentiation mechanism, the merit of that person will be proportional. And you know this saying, "There is hope for man until his last breath." So, please try to understand that this life of a human being is a very active system.
I'd like to add a small example as a reply to this question. Let's say you and your toddler made an agreement to spend only 1 hour at the playground, and to play only with some specific toys. Do you know any toddler who does as he agrees? No, toddler does not. Because the toddler is baffled and enchanted by the attractions of the playground. The child wants to stay longer, or play some other toys that are not suitable to his or her age. Our world life is like such a playground. And the world is notorious for enchanting the beings that incarnate here. All ancient teachings and religious books describe this property of the world. And let's say, the toddler grows up and now he or she is 9 or 10 years old, that is, a human being who increased his or her comprehension and more inclined to abide by the agreements, to keep promises and to do the deeds he or she needs to do, and then, to leave the playground at the agreed time.
That's such a nice example, thank you, Tümerhan. Yes, because that 10-year-old child gained experience, established some certain cause and effect connections in his mind, he suffered the consequences of not leaving the attractions of the playground at the agreed time. And many situations and conditions emerged in his life to make different choices, and as the child learns managing his wants and his needs, then a day comes, and the child sees that he does not need to spend that much time at the playground. Yes, similar to this example, as beings, as long as we are at that childlike level of comprehension, then we have a say in those promises or necessary deeds only in proportion to our level of comprehension. This is why there are mechanisms to remind us those promises, those necessities, those needs. There are guardians or beings in duty that nudge us, push us, and if necessary, take our hand and pull us, as if to say, "It is late, you need to go home. It is midnight, you need to sleep now." When we need to be pushed and pulled like this, we don't intervene the flow of life, but rather, life directs and pushes us further. However, the more we mature, the less life pushes us. And if there are points in life we need to be pushed, then we can control our responses and reactions to these conditions to decrease the time we have to spend within such situations. Because we had prior experience and knowledge about such situations and how we used to react to these. We learn to navigate ourselves properly. And this is what we call developing spiritual muscles. And, again, the beings in duty have complete comprehension compared to the beings at the level of human stage. In this sense, keeping promises exactly can only be possible at the level and agency of the beings in duty. Still, in the magnificent and immense divine order, there is an incredibly fair and just balance. The needs of each never are in conflict with the needs of another. Yes, let's continue reading. A being who owns a body because of certain needs begins to live in the world at a level of conscience equilibrium that is suitable to his developmental state and takes place in various communal situations according to his plan. None of these descents and placements is arbitrary or random. The making of an individual plan is not a simple task either. As we previously said, a man has innumerable connections with the communal plans in which he lives. These are taken into consideration, for example, according to whichever nation, religion, community, with certain mores, family and individuals, with certain inclinations, merits, wants, powers and level of development, that being needs to come into and to make communal plans with them according to whichever mutual needs. All of these are minutely calculated, regulated, mutually determined and planned beforehand, and naturally with the help of beings in duty in accordance with his developmental imperatives. This is the plan that needs to be executed in the world. The being gets prepared to descend into his surroundings in the world, which is regulated with this plan. During this regulation, the beings of the bodies who will be parents of that being are consulted, their decisions are taken, and according to these decisions, if some improvements and alterations need to be done in the bodies of the to-be parents, either individual or communal, and even economical states, these are regulated as well. That is, their situation, according to the newcomer into their midst, is also straightened out by the beings in duty. Shortly, everything is arranged. In the descent of a being to the world, numerous beings are working in their service. Bodies in the world who are related to that being generally participate in these preparations automatically. Parents, relatives, midwife, doctor, hospital, nursery, orphanage, school, community, state, in short, near and far a great number of bodies are unknowingly taking on duties in various ways for the current and future life of the being who will descend to the world. And they most often do their duties automatically. So, mankind work for attaining the intuitions of the great plan of duty within the establishments and communities we have mentioned before, by making automatic efforts in order to fulfill these automatic duties.
Well, this passage is so clear. I cannot imagine a much clearer explanation than this. Here, in the first paragraph, what strikes my attention is this sentence. None of these descents and placements is arbitrary or random. As you can understand from the title of this book, there is a divine order in the universe, and the universe works in accordance with this divine order. And having a body, or incarnation, is a part of this order. And all those minute details listed after this first sentence are events, conditions and situations we encounter that are arranged as all possible options under the direction and governance of the beings in the cadre of original principle, that are determined by the beings in the cadre of destiny and consequently, corresponding all of these with temporal counterparts as manifestations by those beings workings with the time mechanism. We must always remember this. I get the impression of an immense army, working incessantly for ensuring the development of beings, for our progress on the right direction. And, obviously, this immense work put a load on our shoulders. This is our task. We must get developed and widen our comprehension to honor this debt. I mean, there is such an immense amount of work that continues incessantly on behalf of each human being that we need to honor this great effort. Another sentence. And they most often do their duties automatically. Even for executing these automatic tasks and duties, energy and efforts need to be expended. And this phrase. So, mankind work for attaining the intuitions of the great plan of duty within the establishments and communities we have mentioned before. In almost all of our previous videos, we had mentioned that our main task in the human stage is to gain intuitions of the plan of duty. Therefore, here we read about all those diligence and efforts in the process of a new human being's coming to this world, efforts of the ambulance driver taking the soon-to-be mother to the hospital in time, diligence and efforts of the nurses and doctor. All those efforts take shape and form in relation to their closeness of those persons to the intuition of duty. Maybe, such a comparative example makes the topic clearer. A staff nurse that helps the birth of 10 babies in a row but in an automatic way, without a sense of devotion or emotional approach, yes, that nurse will gain some intuition of duty. Yet, in a remote northern region where the roads between villages are closed due to heavy snow, now think of a midwife that travels kilometers on foot in order to help a woman having a difficult birth, with self-motivation of devotion and empathy, then you can see that this midwife is closer to the intuition of duty at the conscience mechanism. I mean, even we do things and tasks in an automatic manner, we can still have to review the reactions and responses we give to the events, so we can honestly detect the reasons and purposes of things and tasks we do.
After all, our main purpose is to break the automatism, to get out of the automatism. Then we begin to notice, to become aware, to widen the capacity of comprehension, to make connections between things, and to open ourselves to more intuitions. Let's continue reading. A being, who owns a body built around a plan prepared with such minute calculations, and by the activities and labors of numerous beings in duty, will certainly be in debt to the individuals of the communal plan to which he is connected, and he has shouldered these debts even before he come into the world. In spite of this, if a day comes and he forgets the promise he gave on the face of the preparers and the helpers and compromises, denies his debts, slackens his execution of his plan, and moreover, if he attempts suicide, he will be doing such a distant and contradictory act. Such a contradictory act against the intuition of duty is the lowest level of the earthly cravings in that life, and his responsibility is heavy, albeit automatic. Automatism of this heavy responsibility manifests very intense sufferings and tormenting reactions. Only the knowledge of comparison, which is very demanding, of this heavy automatism can push such a man further within semi-comprehending states. The body serves a being, and becomes a symbol of that being in the crude world matter. It is similar to the symbol of the spirit, which is the being, in the deeper sense. Therefore, this relationship of body being spirit, which is different from each other but extends from the body to the spirit, evokes in mankind in the world an assumption that there is spirit in the body.
Yes. We were talking about how we sometimes falter despite the promises we made, and this passage is about the topic of suicide, the extreme stumble and falter of a human being. Instead of learning from adverse and tormenting events that emerge as shocks, and instead of dealing with such shocks to understand better, a person chooses the most sensual option. As we read here, contradictory act against the intuition of duty is the lowest level of the earthly cravings in that life. Why? Because that person does not only end something that is exclusive to him or her. As we discussed as we read the previous passages, that person acts against the entire order, against his or her family, and against the order of the community he or she is in service to. His or her tasks become unfinished, neglected. In short, too many debts and responsibilities become left unmet, unpaid. And there is another side to this topic of suicide. Mostly, people cannot digest and face the consequences of shocking events and choose this so-called escape. Yet, we know that such a human being, while dying, will transfer the impressions leading to this harrowing experience and choice to the unconscious, and then, this information will be pushed to the subconscious to be processed during the spatium period by the great accounting and comparison with the essence knowledge gained from previous lifetimes. This seemingly easy choice of the human being results in a state full of harsher and more tormenting mental and emotional imagery of that last life that need to be processed in the spatium. To make people keep away from such extreme decisions, almost all religions command against suicide, and to encourage people to carry on no matter which hardships they encounter. Ideas like, "After the deepest darkness comes the light of the dawn," are introduced to the collective human psyche. Still, we humans tend to blame others, especially when we are more inclined to the sensuality side of the conscience mechanism, and blaming the family, the lover, the partner, the society can be extended to blaming the creator. Such blaming tendencies are the signs of the victim mentality, because a person does not or cannot know or work to know about the connection to his or her being, a human being may feel all alone in this immense universe teeming with motion and life, and such a person may choose this extreme mistake against the divine order. Yet, instead of escaping the hardships of the bodily life, the being encounters much heavier loads in the spatium period.
Indeed, the consequences of any action and choice we make must be lived by us so we can learn from these, but when we don't take our own responsibility, then we have the victim mentality. Instead of taking our own responsibility in the events or in relationships, it feels easy to put the blame on others by saying, "I failed because of you, they ruined my life," etc. You, him, her, they. And eventually, humans put the blame on a higher source, the Creator, assuming that they don't have any influence over the outcomes they don't like. However, taking your own responsibility indicates that you are growing, both in comprehension and conscience. Yes, this entails efforts and hard work to learn, to experience, to compare, to evaluate, and to respond, instead of avoiding the necessities the growth brings. As you said, when we think and act against the higher, then we are in conflict with our own being and the scope of our being. For example, during regression therapy sessions, we discover that some people are tested and trailed by the same conditions they couldn't deal in their past lifetimes and committed suicide. And when such people explore their life plan, they discover that they should not do as they did in those past lifetimes. I mean, their beings promised to stay in the body until the last breath as the life plan for their current life is outlined. And, let's think together, why does a person commit suicide? Because, at that point in their suffering, they think that all solutions to their problem are exhausted, there is no more options, alternatives, or solutions. And at this point of blocked state of mind, they assume death as the last resort. However, it is possible for each human being to see there are more options if they change their perspective just a little. And it is good that this extreme act is engraved in humankind's mind as a capital sin by the religions and ancient teachings. Because otherwise, whenever people feel some helplessness, they could end their life. All those rules and commands were to ensure the continuity of humankind's physical existence, by stating that humans must progress and advance by spending extra efforts at the point where all options look exhausted, that humans should struggle without easily giving up. And it may be that many people find the strength for enduring hardships just because of their faith in such religious commands and rules. Yes, maybe at first, because of their belief system. But later, as they move beyond that reality and reach a wider comprehension, then they see life sacred because of their sense of responsibility and comprehension. Because the most precious and most important lifetime of ours is this current one. To be alive is such a power invested in us. In order to use this power properly, we must appreciate the value of life, utilize it to its maximum without abusing it, spend all of our efforts in that direction. Search for a leverage point at moments we feel stuck, widen our alternatives, and to live our life. As you said, this body is not only ours, an immense orchestration of beings, be it the stomach or the brain, utilize this power for their own development. So, when only one of these beings decide to pull the plug, the entire field of experience and this incredibly efficient organization of innumerable beings become halted. And dear friends, if you remember what we have been discussing in this series about the process of death and after death, the last thoughts, feelings and emotions a person has as dying have utmost importance during the spatium period. Because all those mental and emotional imagery in the unconscious will be reviewed and evaluated by the being, without any chance of justifications or defense mechanisms because the body and personality cease to exist. And here, in this passage, we read, "The knowledge of comparison, which is very demanding, of this heavy automatism, can push such a man further within semi-comprehending states." I understand this as no matter how heavy the automatisms we are in, the knowledge of comparison may take us out from those heavy levels to lighter ones, so we can move into semi-comprehending states. So, help is always available. Well, dear friends, I wish you a good evening and a productive week. Hoping to see you next week.
Thank you, dear friends, for your comments and attendance. Wishing you all a good evening.